JP Lawrence here. I've been watching all of the panels over the course of the morning. It's been great listening to everyone. I'm really excited now to moderate a panel on recruiting and hiring veterans. We've got Jeff Hall, the National Employment Director at DAV, Disabled American Veterans, and also Chris Newsome, the VP of Candidate Aggregation for Recruit Military. I think this is going to be a really interesting panel to figure out how companies can improve their workforce by attracting and gaining former military talent. I guess, I'd like to throw it over to Jeff. Jeff, good morning. How are you today? And what can you tell us about the recruiting environment?
Hey, good morning. Thank you for, I guess I would just kick it off by saying thank you to military veterans of journalism, especially Russell and Zach. And it's just a real privilege to be here joining the event and certainly sharing the company with all the folks here. Ultimately, just to give some basic context, I'm an Army combat veteran from the first Persian Gulf War, and I joined DAV's professional team as a national service officer, which is also known as, a veterans benefits counselor, back in 1993. I've held various positions within DAV, but currently, and for the past 7 years, was moved up to the National Employment Director, my current role, with charged with the responsibility to set up an employment program to really drive forward in helping veterans certainly secure meaningful employment, whether they're transitioning out of the military or they've been out of the military for some time. It was really great to be the one that was going to head up that particular program. But being a veterans benefits advocate, as I had been trained to be in the past and for many, many years, about 20 years at that particular point, my approach was certainly from the individual of helping the individual veteran. What are their needs? What are they looking for? And trying to connect them with employers. And it didn't take very long to realize that one of the larger nets to cast really was working directly with companies that were looking to hire veterans. That was where we sort of retooled a lot of the stuff that we were doing. Certainly we do the one-on-one engagement with veterans and their spouses to help connect them with whatever, employment opportunities are out there or what path to take. But when we really started connecting with employers and helping them in a much larger way, things started to become a little bit easier, if you will. I don't want to underplay it, but using that expression, it became a little easier when working with companies directly. Like, what are their needs? Do they have, everything from setup to, hey, the phrase at that particular point was like we're a military friendly company, to really military ready is a much different type of phrase and means really, quite frankly, a lot different to companies out there. But working with individual companies in all industries at that particular point allowed us certainly to understand what hardships they were having, what challenges certainly that they were coming across. And it kept coming back to, we really want to hire veterans, but specifically, we want to hire more disabled veterans. But we really don't know how to go about doing it. And the conversation ranged so widely from individual challenges that companies had to things that were in a much larger scale. What we really found out was companies were really falling into the trap of self-imposed challenges that they had, that they were creating. You hire disabled veterans the way you hire anyone else. That's really the short message, that if you're going to hire veterans, then there's no difference in a disabled veteran versus a non-disabled veteran. So, but from that, we developed, put a lot of research into and developing and then rolling out our DAV guide to hiring and retaining veterans with disabilities, which is a practical solutions guide to offer that to companies that had, small challenges or what we would say, entry-level type challenges. And so this guide that we came out with is available either in hard copy, but really our hiring guide is available on our website, which is jobs.dav.org. In setting up the program and working more towards, what we're working with companies and things like that, we have our online tools and resources, direct engagement, and then of course, we work in a variety of ways with companies, whether we go to their actual company and help them. Do you have an employee resource group for veterans? Do you have what makes you having the challenges? That said, for us, we have one, major strategic partner. We have two, but our main strategic partner is Recruit Military, and we host career fairs with Recruit Military throughout the year. This is where a lot of that engagement with companies and what their needs are, what their challenges that they were encountering. And so working with Recruit Military and hosting in the Upward neighborhood prior to COVID, 140 career fairs every year, most of which, 125 of which, being in-person career fairs. That's a lot of engagement on both sides of the table with both veterans seeking employment and also companies that were seeking their talents. So to that end, and I'll just flip it back to you and say, that's kind of the program in a nutshell. We're pleased, really, really pleased to be a sponsor of this particular event. And we're certainly hopeful that that's ongoing, because we do know that DAV has an extraordinary communications team itself. We produce our own magazine, everything online, all of those things that, that comms or people with journalism backgrounds. That's why we have them. Our overwhelming majority of the team in communications are military veterans who, had journalism careers or in some particular way were involved in public affairs communications while they were on active duty. So that said, it's a real pleasure to be here and be part of this whole convention conference. And I'll just leave it there for the time being and say, just happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I'd like to welcome Chris to the chat. Chris is also a veteran. I think 82nd Airborne, I think, right?
That's right, JP.
I'm glad to have you here. I'd like to admonish the chat. The career advice is to be professional. But Chris, I think it'd be great to have your perspective, from your transition out and then now in your current position. What are the things that employers are looking for?
Yeah, thanks, JP. I echo everything that Jeff said as far as the gratitude for being welcome to speak on this particular panel or for this event. I think what you guys are doing is beyond important. Getting more prior servicemen and women into journalism, I think, is an extension of their service. They wore the uniform, they served their country. The world needs news. The world needs to know what's happening. And America in particular, could really benefit from, having kind of a renaissance as far as having fresh blood coming into, journalism and holding that line when it comes to journalistic integrity. And I can't think of a better demographic than the military community. So with that said, my experience relative to transition, I think it was pretty common. I think a lot of people make the same, mistakes in some cases. Transition can be hard because it's a culture shock, but it doesn't have to be impossible. And one of the biggest looming threats is employment. It serves as kind of a linchpin to your success when you're making that pivot, whether you only serve for 4 years or you served an entire career. So, when I'm working with individuals or groups and providing best practices, I think what's equally important with those best practices is what's to avoid. And a lot of, the missteps can be avoided. And some of it starts by simply just being prepared, understanding what you want to do moving forward. When I transitioned out, I was very similar to Jeff's path. I was combat arms, I was infantry with the Army. And, when I transitioned, I didn't really know how to translate what I had done. Even though I had a wealth of experience, I had a wealth of intangibles and virtues and values and skill sets that are certainly applicable to just about any organization that's out there looking to tap into a talent pool. I didn't know how to talk about it. And that's what we tend to see on both sides of the aisle, whether you're the job seeker or whether you're the employer that's looking for the talent. There's a communication breakdown. The military speaks in jargon. We have our own language, so to speak, but when you take that language and you try to apply it to a civilian resume, it can come across as, hieroglyphics to the reader if it's an untrained eye that doesn't have that military experience. So we try to encourage men and women to look at what they did and try to make, it's not always an apples to apples translation, but to tap into some of those core competencies. If you served within 3 to 4 years, there's a 90% chance you were in a leadership capacity at some point. You have management experience. So regardless of what your MOS was or what you want to do moving forward, make sure that you can kind of wrap your head around that as far as articulating where you're going to fit into the next role. But the good news with everything that's happening in the world right now, it seems like everything's on fire. But there are glimmers of hope. There's silver lining to just about everything. And what we're seeing right now is an insane increase in demand for talent, generally speaking, let alone top tier talent. And that's what we consider the military demographic to be. I know that when we're talking in terms of military issues or veteran hiring initiatives, a lot of times it's always associated, with just being exclusively philanthropy. These are men and women that volunteered, that said yes to defend freedom. They went overseas, they were deployed in combat zones. And, at the beginning of all of this, a handful of years ago, the narrative was, these men and women fought for freedom. We owe it to them to make sure that we can welcome them home, with a red carpet and at the very least with career opportunities. And while that may have been the place where a lot of organizations started, we've evolved. Corporate America has really evolved their thinking to the point where this goes beyond flag waving and patriotism and altruism. It's really about, it makes good business sense. These men and women have gone through things that you can't throw at them, that there's nothing you can throw at them that they can't handle, regardless of what profession, what industry you might be exploring. The service member has gone through or endured something considerably more difficult or more stressful and has operated in a zero fail environment. So, any company would benefit from that. But going beyond those talking points, there's data that supports that these men and women can be more easily retained. And I think when we're talking about employment, it's important to discern between hiring and retention, the two fundamentally different topics. And these companies spend a lot of money to do both of those things. And if your hiring process eventually lends itself to being a revolving door, meaning these men and women are not staying long enough, it's kind of a mismatch. It doesn't matter all that much. You have a company that maybe hired 100 personnel, whether they be military or otherwise, but at the end of the year, they've only retained 20% of that initial group that they hired. I would dare to challenge them that their company culture should probably be reviewed, or look at just the environment, the managers that are stewarding these men and women through their careers. So, but bottom line, it's a good time to be professionally curious because there is a literal labor shortage across the country. You can't drive down the street without hitting a handful of signs that say help wanted. And it's difficult right now, but it's forced these companies to step up their game and to enhance what they're offering, going beyond just employment. What is their corporate culture like? Are these positions, what are the benefits? What kind of PTO? What kind of, we've seen companies that'll throw, daycare into the mix, gym memberships, truly anything that they can to make it a little more fun and exciting, or to differentiate between another hiring entity, within their industry. So companies are competing with each other to not only hire talent that's out there that's making a career change, but to also focus on their own retention, because again, that revolving door will just crush any company. So, we pride ourselves in being able to really work closely and collaborate with entities like DAV. They're really our partners in crime. We go to a lot of different places. Sometimes we're on military installations. Sometimes we're in traditional quote unquote civilian markets where there isn't a military base, right around the corner. And we're seeing just a real diverse cross section of interest as far as what they want to do moving forward. And while it's important to acknowledge that within the military, there are journalism centric MOSs, there are photojournalism opportunities, there are, public affairs offices opportunities, there are MOSs that lend itself to the industry. But I think what's more important is to acknowledge the fact that the vast majority of military men and women, when they transition, they're going another direction than their MOS. their military occupational specialty, their job code. Roughly 60 to 70% are going to make a pivot and go in a completely other direction. So there's really nothing stopping somebody like myself who was, combat arms. I was an infantry soldier, from going a completely different route and perhaps pursuing journalism or, any other category of work that might be of interest to me. So, as I look in our own ecosystem, like Jeff mentioned, we're working with thousands and thousands of companies and hundreds of thousands of military personnel to date. Together we've probably helped collectively roughly 1.5 million men and women get connected with employers, get support with their resume, some general career coaching, maybe getting them connected to a mentor, whatever the case might be. We support a large volume of these men and women. And what I found interesting, very relative to this session, or speaking with your team on the front end a couple months ago, is that we have thousands of men and women that have journalism backgrounds or future work interests in journalism. Many of these men and women are getting out of the service and they're pursuing higher education. Somebody like myself who was enlisted, the vast majority of the military is enlisted, and when they transition, most of them have access to education benefits, so it allows them to skill up. So for somebody that did want to go into journalism that didn't necessarily have a dedicated path, they can pursue that path via higher education and start networking from there. And we always encourage men and women to kind of, leverage some of the other resources that are out there as a force multiplier. On top of the thousands, I'm looking at over 11,000 men and women that have direct work interest and or experience within journalism in our ecosystem, that any employer, from a journalistic perspective, whether it be an actual media outlet or let's say an organization that's looking for a PR team or staff writers, things along those lines. We have thousands of men and women that are interested in that vertical. And on the other side of that coin, we've got, thousands of opportunities for the actual job seekers that may be coming from the military community that are interested in journalism. I think, as I last counted, I don't have it directly in front of me, but it was over 2,700 open opportunities that men and women from our community, from the military community, can apply to today to pursue those opportunities. So again, I really think what you guys are doing, what veterans in journalism actually represents, is such a solution to a large scale issue. The country has we're being bombarded, especially after COVID. We've spent 18 months and spending more time indoors than we typically have, and we have a lot of information that's thrown at us at any point in time, and there are times where trust in some of that information erodes. And again, I think nobody better to hold the line than to incorporate more members from the military community into this sort of profession. So.
Yeah, Chris, I think there was an interesting point that you raised up, and I wanted to go to questions for both of you. We've talked a lot at this conference about what veterans can bring, all the strengths that they have, not only their skills, but their temperament and their ability to work through things. I wanted to ask about what employers can do. Like veterans, they're a unique workforce. A lot of them are older. A lot of them are starting work later, have families. What would you say that employers should do if they want to have this good retention and not, what's the point of getting a job if you get out of the military and hate it more, Just throwing it out to both of you.
No,
what should employers do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Jeff, I'll take the first stab at it and tee you up to carry it across the finish line if that works. It is a unique demographic. It's a protected class, as far as members of the workforce goes, but we don't want corporate America to think that this is a Rubik's Cube to solve, that this is some mystery demographic that you have to figure out the perfect way to fit them into the mix. While they are unique and their experiences are unique, and in some cases, depending on how long they served, they may be more senior initially entering the workforce. But, I use myself as an example. When I transitioned from the Army, I had served 4 years, done a handful of tours, but I was only 22, 23 years old. So you're still able to tap into a pretty fresh age demographic from this community. Because again, I mentioned the majority are enlisted, and the majority of those that are enlisted are only serving between 4 and 8 years. So you're going to get kind of a middle of the road candidate. This isn't somebody fresh out of high school, certainly, but they're comparable in many cases with the newly graduating class from college. So, they fit that age range. So don't worry too much about trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. These men and women are normal candidates, and in many cases, we like to say that that military experience is only an enhancement to their marketability. They've gone through experiences, and the United States government has invested considerably in making them masters within the capacity that they serve. So certainly, again, high tier talent. But when it comes to how do you make it work? How do you recruit and retain military candidates? It's truly not terribly difficult. The biggest things that you need to focus on are things that you should be focusing on for the rest of your workforce, which is ensuring that there's a healthy work culture, that it's merit-based or performance-based upward mobility. These men and women are accustomed to having access to promotions. They go from being on the enlisted side, a private, all the way up to a sergeant major if you put in the time. So they just want to make sure they just want opportunities to excel and go beyond where they are today. They want, respectable wages so that they can provide for themselves, for their families, whatever the case might be. And, truly, it's nothing terribly alien from what any everyday employee would want or need. So it's not that complicated, but I think it's always wise for any organization to kind of audit their current workforce, identify veterans that currently work for the organization, regardless of what the organization might do, find out who currently is on the workforce that served at some point, and then really pick their brain, and ask them to actually advocate. When Jeff and I are on the road and we're at a career fair, the companies that we see that do the best, they bring a veteran with them from that organization, whether they have a veteran that's on their recruiting team or simply a veteran that works for the organization that they could get to bring along with them to serve as a recommendation from one veteran to another, to say, hey, Sergeant Smith, my name's, Sergeant Williams, and I took a similar route as you did, and I work for this company, and here's why. Here's why I think this is a great place for another veteran to hang their hat and to call this home as far as their next career goes. So I'd say that's the lowest hanging fruit that one could do instantaneously without having to reinvent the wheel or go back to the drawing board. So with that,
thanks,
for the
Chris.
sake of time.
We'll throw to Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that was a lot of great information that Chris just shared. And I would just kind of add to that part of what, I had mentioned earlier and understand for companies to understand or employers to understand, what the veteran community, what those transitioning from the military, what they represent kind of collectively, number one, regardless of what their job was in the military. And I think we're seeing it kind of unfold in many ways right now in the, the workforce climate that we have, to where soft skills are one of those types of things that has now become front and center for a lot of companies. In other words, soft skills being, can you come to work? Can you come to work on time? Can you be kind to people? So on and so forth. Soft skills that a lot of us know that's just part of our nature of what we are, but somewhere along the way that may have been lost. Companies are sort of, in many ways, extremely hungry for that, to come back to their particular company. So there's a lot of basic things that companies, want to make sure that they're doing, number one. And it speaks to the point of, are you military friendly versus military ready? And again, as I mentioned earlier, that's a completely different thing. Military friendly essentially means, hey, we recognize the veteran, you've served our country. We really appreciate it. You're going to get something on your name badge that says you're a military veteran. Those things are nice, but that doesn't really speak to the overall environment. Whereas military friendly or military ready, meaning, do you have veterans integrated into your HR process, your hiring process? Because it just makes sense to have that. As Chris said, military jargon alone, different things that can stumble or create challenges in an interviewing process and make companies push away, like, I don't know what this guy's talking about, whatever the case may be, or I'm looking at a DD-214 and I'm not sure what this was because I was Army, this person was Navy, whatever the case may be. There's differences. And having those people integrated into your HR process are not only advisable, it's certainly going to provide a value there. So again, without kind of going into point by point, again, our hiring guide does speak to a lot of those things that companies can be doing to make sure that you're tapping into the talent pool, how you should be, where you should be, and all of these things. Just again, fully embracing the veteran community is one thing, but embracing them, knowing and understanding the disciplines and things that they're going to bring to your company are another thing. And one last point, and to me, it's astonishing that many companies still don't know or are not aware that there's a lot of advantages of hiring veterans and hiring disabled veterans in your companies. If nothing else, there's a lot of things like work opportunity tax credits and things like that the companies should be taking advantage of to bring that talent pool in. That's why, the federal government provides those types of incentives to bring them in. So again, we speak to a lot of that in our DAV guide to hiring and retaining veterans with disabilities. But aside that, you've got a great organization like our partner with Recruit Military and people like Chris that work over there, to where if your company's just not engaged with where to go and where to find, I wouldn't rely on just simply answering the question yourself. There's a lot of professional sources out there that can lend a hand.
Thank you for including your professional expertise to this recruiting and hiring veterans panel. I'd like to thank both of you for speaking today and sharing so much information. We have a career fair for MVJ coming up, and I hope everyone comes over and sees how they can get hired and recruited.
Thanks, JP.
Thank you much, JP.
All right, have a good one, both of you. Bye. All right.